She folded her shorts. That is where the story begins. Not with the locked doors, not with the dogs going frantic, not with the 3 cars sitting untouched in the driveway at 8 in the morning when there should have been none. It begins with a pair of flowered shorts, folded neatly and placed on top of a pair of sandals at the foot of a king-size waterbed, with a young woman's jewelry tucked into the pockets. Stacy McCall was 18 years old. She had driven across Springfield in the small hours of a June morning to sleep at her friend's house, to see the new waterbed, to rest before a day trip to a water park. She had been undressing for bed when whatever happened next happened. And she had been tidy about it, in the particular way that people are tidy when they feel safe, when the world still makes sense, when there is no reason to believe that folding your clothes before sleep is anything other than a small, ordinary gesture at the end of a long, celebratory day. She was never seen again. Neither was Susie Streer, 19 years old, whose half-finished Coke sat on the nightstand beside her. Neither was Cheryl Levitt, 47 years old, whose reading glasses were on the table beside her open book, whose $900 in cash sat untouched in her purse on the floor, who had not lit her first cigarette of the morning because she was gone before morning came. No blood, no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no bodies, no arrests, ever. It has been 33 years. If the detail of the folded shorts unsettles you in the way it should, stay with me. Because this episode is not about the mystery of 3 missing women, though the mystery is real and unresolved. It is about the anatomy of how that mystery was created and then preserved, not by a perfect crime, but by a sequence of institutional decisions, human failures, and cognitive vulnerabilities that compounded one another across 3 decades until what should have been solvable became something else entirely. Every failure in this case was ordinary. That is what makes it so instructive, and that is what makes it so devastating. If this is the kind of investigation you came here for, subscribe right now and do not go anywhere. Because what this case reveals about the systems that are supposed to protect people and then find them is not comfortable. And it does not get less complicated the deeper we go. To understand the night of June 6th into the 7th of 1992, you have to understand the city that contained it. Springfield. Missouri sits in the southwest corner of the state, in the foothills of the Ozark Plateau, a landscape of rolling farmland and limestone bluffs carved through by rivers quiet enough to lose almost anything in them. In 1992, it was a city of roughly 140,000 people, conservative, community-oriented, the kind of place where high school graduation was still a civic event and the general texture of daily life was one of continuity and relative safety. It was known as the Queen City of the Ozarks, as the birthplace of Route 66, and by most accounts as a perfectly reasonable place to raise a family. That perception matters enormously. It matters because perception is one of the most powerful forces operating in any investigation. What we collectively believe about a place shapes what we are willing to imagine happening inside it. And what we are willing to imagine shapes where we look and what we are prepared to see. 1717 East Delmare Street was a modest single-story home in the eastern part of the city. Cheryl Levitt had purchased it on a contract arrangement just 2 months earlier, in April of that year, and she had been renovating it methodically since. She was 47 years old, 5 feet tall, 110 pounds, bleached blonde hair, brown eyes. She had worked as a hairdresser at New Attitudes Hair Salon on West Sunshine Street long enough to have built a client list of 250 people. She was not invisible. She was one of those people woven so thoroughly into the fabric of a place that her disappearance would leave an identifiable hole. She had been married twice. First to Brent Streer, Susie's father, whom she divorced in 1973, then to Don Levitt, with whom she had moved to Springfield from Seattle, and from whom she had separated in 1989 when he returned to the West Coast and remarried. She had a son, Bart, with whom her relationship had been turbulent. And she had Susie. Suzanne Elizabeth Streer was 19 years old on the night she graduated from Kickapoo High School. 5 feet 2, 102 pounds. shoulder-length bleached blonde hair, brown eyes like her mother, a scar on her upper right forearm. Friends described her as outgoing, energetic, the kind of person who filled a room. She had enrolled to start cosmetology school in the fall, planning to follow her mother into the trade. She wanted to do hair. She wanted, in all the specific and modest ways that 19-year-olds want things, to build a life that made sense. She and Cheryl were close in the charged way that mothers and only daughters who have navigated hard years together sometimes become close. Close enough that whenever Susie came home, she went to her mother's room first. Always. To check in. To say she was home safe. That habit, that small nightly ritual of connection, is one of the most specific and human details in this entire case. It tells you who they were to each other in a way that no biographical summary can. Stacy Kathleen McCall was 18. She was born on the 23rd of April, 1974. 5'3", 120 pounds, long dark blonde hair, blue eyes, freckles across a tanned face, a slight cleft in her chin. She suffered from migraines, which she managed with a prescription she carried everywhere, because the pain when it came could be incapacitating. She worked as a secretary and receptionist at the Springfield Gymnastics Center, and in the fall she intended to start at Southwest Missouri State University, where she and her best friend Janelle Kirby had already been accepted and planned to pledge the same sorority. Stacy and Susie had not always been close. Their friendship had drifted and then reconverged in the months before graduation, pulled back together through Janelle, who had been the connective tissue between them since grade school. The friendship was renewed, warm, easy in the way that reconnected friendships sometimes are, carrying the history of the first version and the freshness of the second. These are the three women. Hold them as specific people, not as case designations. A hairdresser renovating her first owned home. A 19-year-old who always checked in with her mother. An 18-year-old whose white cocker spaniel puppy named Bubba was waiting at her parents' house, a graduation gift she intended to collect the morning after the trip to Whitewater. She never collected the dog. June 6, 1992, was a Saturday. It began the way high school graduation Saturdays always begin, with ceremony and photographs and the specific brightness of people standing at a threshold. The Kickapoo High School commencement was held at the Hammond Student Center on the campus of Southwest Missouri State. Susie was there. Stacy was there. Cheryl was there, the only family member present for Susie that day, seated in the arena while her daughter crossed the stage. After the ceremony ended at 6 in the evening, they went home separately to change. At 7:30, one of Susie's friends delivered a white graduation cake to 1717 East Delmare. It had "Congrats Sus" written on it. Susie and Cheryl sat together that evening with pizza, a quiet celebration between two people who had built something together over years of difficulty. Their bond was strong enough that Susie actually considered canceling her plans to stay home with her mother that night. She decided against it, but the fact that she considered it tells you something essential about what they were to each other. By 8:15, Susie was at Janelle Kirby's house in Battlefield, a suburb about 10.5 miles southwest of the Levitt home. Stacy arrived 15 minutes later. The group went to a graduation party on South Coach Drive, hosted by a classmate named Brian Joy. The evening was loose and celebratory. At 10:30, Stacy called home and told her mother Janice that they had changed their plans. Instead of driving to Branson that night and sleeping at a hotel, they would stay at Janelle's house and leave for Whitewater in the morning. Janice McCall was relieved. She and her husband Stu carried a specific and documented fear about late-night driving among young people. On the night of their own graduation, decades earlier, 2 of their friends had been killed in a traffic accident. The changed plan felt like safety. What neither Janice nor Cheryl knew in that moment was that the plans would change again. Sometime before 1 in the morning, the group drove from Battlefield to a second party on East Hanover Street, about 8 miles east of Janelle's house. They left their own cars at the Kirby home and rode with others. When they arrived at around 1:30, the party was already breaking up. A neighbor had called police. Officers had come to shut it down, and the group left after 20 minutes. Susie had been dealing with a growing stomach ache since early evening, most likely from the pizza. They returned briefly to the Joy House in Battlefield. There was some discussion, reported slightly differently across various accounts, about whether an invitation to sleepover had been offered and then withdrawn. What is certain is that when Stacy and Susie went back to the Kirby house, they found it more crowded than expected. Relatives visiting from Kansas had arrived and were sleeping in the room the girls had planned to use. Janelle's mother had laid out a pallet on the living room floor, but the house felt full and the arrangement felt awkward. So Stacy and Susie decided to drive to Delmare Street instead. Susie had a reason beyond logistics. She wanted to show Stacy her new king-size waterbed, the one Cheryl had given her as a graduation present. They left Battlefield in separate cars, Stacy following Susie northeast through the city, arriving at East Delmare Street at approximately 2:15 in the morning. Janelle's mother, Kathy Kirby, was still awake and witnessed their departure. She heard Susie say to Stacy, "Follow me to my house, okay?" Stacy said, "I will." Then they drove away. That is the last verified sighting of either of them. By 8 in the morning, Janelle was trying to reach the house. No answer. She left a message. She tried again. Still, nothing. By 9 o'clock, she and her boyfriend Mike Henson were concerned enough to drive to Delmare Street themselves. What they found was this. All 3 cars were in the driveway or on the Circle Drive. Cheryl's blue Mitsubishi Eclipse, Susie's red Ford Escort with a personalized license plate, SUETER, Stacy's red Toyota Corolla. 3 cars belonging to 3 women who had no reason to have left without them. On the porch, the glass globe from the exterior light fixture was shattered. The bulb itself was intact and still burning, but the globe that enclosed it had been broken into pieces across the porch floor. Janelle and Mike noted it. Mike picked up a broom and swept the pieces into a bin, because he knew Cheryl would not want broken glass where someone could step on it. He did it as an act of consideration. He did not understand, in that moment, what he was touching. The front door was unlocked. They went inside. Cinnamon, Susie's Yorkshire Terrier, rushed at them, immediately frantic and persistent. No one else was in the house. The beds had been disturbed. In Cheryl's room, her reading glasses sat on the nightstand beside her bed, a book laid face down as if she had been reading when something interrupted her. The lights throughout the house were off, but 2 slats in the blind covering Susie's window had been pulled apart at the center, creating a narrow gap, as if someone inside had looked out into the dark. In front of the sunken bedroom doorway, all 3 women's purses were sitting on the floor together. All their cash, all their cards, all their identification were inside. All 3 sets of car keys were there. Cheryl's purse contained $900 in cash, her earnings from the salon, a bank deposit she had not yet made. Stacy's migraine medication was in her bag. The unfinished graduation cake sat untouched in the refrigerator. Susie's Coke can was on the bedside table, still with liquid in it. The television in her room was running static on an empty channel, which meant whatever tape had been playing had long since ended. And Stacy's flowered shorts had been folded neatly and placed on her sandals at the foot of the waterbed, with her jewelry tucked into the pockets. This detail is not incidental. It is structural. Stacy had arrived at the house intending to sleep. She had begun undressing. She had arranged her things the way a person arranges things when there is nothing threatening about the world. This is not a house from which 3 women stepped outside for a moment, or walked to a neighbor's, or made a quick errand. This is a house from which 3 women were removed while they were in the process of going to bed. And Susie's cigarettes were there, and Cheryl's cigarettes were there. Both of them smoked constantly. People who knew Cheryl noted that one of the first things she did every single morning, without exception, was light a cigarette. The idea that she left her home voluntarily in the middle of the night, without her cigarettes, without her purse, without her glasses, without her car, is behaviorally inconsistent to a degree that approaches the impossible. Investigators would later say the same thing in more measured language, but the weight of what those cigarettes mean has never been more simply stated than this. These were not women who walked out of their own lives. These were women who were removed from them. What happened next in those first 12 hours is not just part of the story. Those 12 hours are one of the primary reasons the story has never ended, and understanding them requires sitting with a fact that is deeply uncomfortable. When Janelle and Mike left the house that morning without finding anything obviously wrong, they went to a water park. They processed the unease that was building in them by treating the situation as a temporary mystery that would resolve itself. Meanwhile, Stacy's mother Janice had been trying to reach her daughter since early morning. She called the Kirby house, learned from Janelle's sister that the girls had not spent the night there, contacted people she knew with connections to the Whitewater Park employees who confirmed Susie and Stacy had not been seen there. Her alarm was growing rapidly. By early afternoon, Janice went to Delmare Street herself. She entered and found what Janelle had found, with one additional detail that was about to be destroyed. The answering machine light was blinking. There was a recorded message on the tape. Janice played it. She later described it only as strange, and could not or would not detail its contents publicly. A visitor in the house, apparently not understanding the significance of what they were doing, accidentally erased it. Think about that for a moment. Not as negligence, but as a mechanism. A stranger's voice, recorded in the hours between 2:15 in the morning and whatever time someone came to that machine and pressed play, was gone before anyone with investigative authority had heard it. The message has been described as strange by the only person who listened to it carefully. Strange is a word that people use when they have heard something that does not fit the normal pattern of a voice, a greeting, a request. Strange is a word that people use when something is wrong. The tape was analog. In 1992, answering machine messages were stored on small cassette tapes that were deleted by rewinding the tape to a position before the messages, allowing new recordings to overwrite the old ones. Investigators have noted that the message might theoretically have been recoverable had the tape been preserved immediately. It was not preserved. It was overwritten. This is not the only piece of evidence destroyed on that Sunday. Before it, the glass on the porch had been swept away. After it, someone emptied ashtrays. Someone washed cups. Someone bent a window blind slat back into shape. The people who arrived and waited that afternoon, trying to make sense of what was happening, cleaned the space around them the way anxious people clean when they have nothing useful to do. Each individual act was understandable. Collectively, they dismantled the forensic record of the most important scene in the investigation. By the time police officer Rick Bookout arrived that Sunday evening, responding to the missing persons call that Janice McCall had finally placed at 8:48 in the evening, 18 people had passed through the house. The attending officer later noted he could still smell the varnish Cheryl had been applying to furniture the previous evening. But the space that might have told investigators exactly what had happened had been altered in ways that could not be undone. Bookout and another officer, Brian G., walked through the house, took notes, spoke to the McCall family. They concluded it was a missing persons case with possible foul play. They left. The missing persons report, numbered 92401169, was filed at 2:50 in the morning on June 8th. Officer Bookout left a small handwritten blue note on the front door, asking the women, if they returned, to please call and cancel the report. That note, that small, handwritten, entirely well-intentioned note, is one of the most revealing documents this case produced. It tells you, more clearly than any institutional statement could, what the initial response to a situation in which every observable detail pointed toward an abduction actually looked like at the operational level. It tells you that the weight of what had been found, the purses, the car keys, the glasses, the cigarettes, the folded shorts, the static television, the erased message, the shattered globe, had not yet been assembled into a picture that demanded a different kind of response. To be clear, the investigation that followed was not small. The Springfield Police Department assigned 30 officers to the case within days, splitting them into 2 teams working 12-hour shifts. The FBI was brought in, and its crisis action team was activated. Police Chief Terry Knowles publicly stated the women almost certainly had not disappeared voluntarily. 20,000 posters went up across the country, in truck stops and bus depots and restaurant windows. The case made national news within days. None of it produced a single confirmed lead. Now we need to talk about what was happening beneath the surface of that investigation, because the Springfield Three is not primarily a case about an unknown perpetrator. It is a case about what happens when the mechanisms that are supposed to protect people, and then find them, fail to operate as intended. And it is a case about how those failures compound one another until what began as a solvable problem becomes something fundamentally different. The psychological spine of this episode is investigator psychology, not because the investigators were incompetent people. The record does not support that reading, and this analysis does not make that claim. What the record supports is something more nuanced and, in many ways, more instructive. The people who worked this case were human beings operating in conditions that activate the most powerful cognitive vulnerabilities that human beings carry: confirmation bias, anchoring, tunnel vision, the pressure to produce visible action when action is what a watching public demands. These are not rare pathologies. They are mechanisms that operate in every person who has ever been under pressure to solve an unsolvable problem in front of an audience. The investigation anchored early and hard on a small number of individuals with documentable connections to the Levitt household. The logic, at first, was sound. In cases of residential abduction involving women who leave no voluntary trace, the statistically most likely responsible party is someone known to the victims. You begin with the known world and move outward. That is orthodox methodology. The problem with orthodox methodology is that it contains its own momentum. Once you have committed investigative resources and public statements to a framework, abandoning that framework is not simply a tactical decision. It is a reputational one. It requires admitting, implicitly, that the resources spent on the prior direction were misallocated. In a case receiving daily media attention, in a city asking daily questions about what its police department was doing, the cost of that kind of admission is not abstract. It is immediate and visible and politically weighted. This is not a claim that Springfield's investigators were dishonest or self-serving in a cynical sense. The research literature on confirmation bias in law enforcement investigations does not characterize the phenomenon as conscious distortion. It characterizes it as a deeply human tendency to unconsciously weight new information in ways that are consistent with existing commitments. When you have built a public posture around a specific theoretical framework, incoming information that fits that framework registers more clearly than information that challenges it. Information that challenges the framework gets processed through a more skeptical filter. The threshold for accepting it as significant is higher. This is not a character flaw. It is a documented feature of human cognition under conditions of uncertainty and social pressure. The Springfield Three investigation, as described by the people who worked within it, operated under conditions that were almost perfectly designed to activate that feature. A high-profile case, a watching city, a chief with a strong public profile and a specific management style, 30 detectives working around the clock in shifts, generating information that had to be assessed and prioritized by people who were simultaneously exhausted and under pressure to show progress. These conditions do not excuse the failures that resulted from them, but understanding them is essential to understanding how the failures occurred and what that means for the investigation's long-term record. But what the evidence suggests, in retrospect, is that the known world was worked through quickly, and then the investigation struggled to move outward with the same rigor. Let me walk you through the specific individuals the investigation focused on, because what those cases reveal about how the investigation's institutional psychology operated is at the core of what this episode is trying to understand. The first significant cluster of suspicion surrounded Dustin Recca. He was Susie's former boyfriend, and the relationship had ended badly enough that the break carried legal dimensions. In the months before graduation, Rekha and 2 associates had broken into a mausoleum in Springfield and stolen gold fillings from a skull. Susie had knowledge of this. She had spoken to investigators about the break-in. She was a potential witness against Rekha in the resulting prosecution. The motive framework is not subtle. Susie was a complication for Rekha. Her testimony could affect his legal situation. And Rekha was connected to the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club, a network with documented associations to violence. When detectives established that Rekha could not be definitively placed away from Springfield on the night of June 6th, the alibi he offered, that he had attended a concert, came into question for some investigators. Investigators also found materials referencing satanic themes in Susie's room during their search of the house. This prompted a specific line of inquiry about whether Susie's connection to Rekha had drawn her into something that subsequently turned against her. The investigation examined this possibility. It did not produce charges. Rekha and his 2 associates were polygraphed. They passed. In December of 1992, one of them testified about the grave robbery, and all 3 received probation and community service. The investigation moved on from them. Many analysts and community members have argued across the years since that this ruling out was premature, that it rested too heavily on polygraph results, which are, in all serious investigative literature, understood as tools rather than determinants. The distinction matters. A polygraph that points in one direction can inform an investigative posture without being sufficient to close a line of inquiry. Whether Springfield's investigation understood and applied that distinction, the available record does not fully reveal. The second significant person of interest was a former boyfriend named Michael Kovat. In September of 1991, Susie had petitioned Greene County Circuit Court for a restraining order against him, alleging he had threatened and harassed her, slashed her tires, and damaged her property on multiple occasions. A court hearing had been scheduled. Susie had not appeared, and the order was dismissed. When detectives located and interviewed Kovat, he provided an alibi for the night of June 6th into the 7th. The alibi was corroborated. He was ruled out. The reliability of that corroboration is worth pausing on. In investigations of violent crimes against women, alibi corroboration provided by a close personal associate is weighted differently by experienced investigators than corroboration provided by independent sources, physical records, or surveillance evidence. The fact that someone vouched for a person's whereabouts does not by itself establish that the vouch was accurate. Whether Springfield's investigators applied appropriate skepticism before closing that line, the documents available do not fully reveal. But there is a third person whose story contains within it almost every element of how a case can be simultaneously worked very hard and still fail to arrive at resolution. And it is worth taking considerable time with him. His name was Robert Craig Cox. In June of 1992, Robert Craig Cox was living in Springfield with his parents. He was in his early 30s. He had a history that the city's investigators would not initially have known about, because the relevant portions of it had occurred in Florida and California. In 1978, while stationed in Georgia as a United States Army Ranger, Cox had been on vacation in Florida when 19-year-old Sharon Zellers was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Her body was found stuffed in a drainage pipe 5 days after she disappeared from her job at Walt Disney World. Cox was not charged until 1988. He was convicted. The Florida Supreme Court overturned the conviction in 1990 on grounds related to the admissibility of DNA evidence, and he was released. California immediately took him into custody on a separate 1985 kidnapping and assault conviction. Sharon Zeller's parents did not let go of him. When they saw the news coverage of the Springfield Three, they recognized a pattern. They contacted Springfield police and told them that Cox had been in the city. He was in their jurisdiction, living within it, with a documented history of abduction and probable sexual violence against women. And the only reason they knew about him was because a murdered woman's grieving parents had recognized a name in a news report. This is a fact that belongs at the center of any honest analysis of this investigation's early failures. When detectives interviewed Cox in 1992, he provided an alibi. He said he had been at church on the morning of June 7th with his girlfriend. His girlfriend confirmed the story. He was ruled out. 5 years later, his girlfriend recanted. She told investigators, under oath before a grand jury, that Cox had asked her to say he was at church with her. He had not been at church with her. The alibi she had provided was false, and she had provided it at his instruction. At that point, Cox was already imprisoned in Texas, having been convicted in 1995 of aggravated robbery involving a firearm committed against a woman and a 12-year-old child. He had also been convicted of attempting to enter a young woman's residence. He told a journalist from prison that he knew the 3 Springfield women had been murdered and buried, and that their remains would never be recovered. He later told investigators he would speak about what happened only after his mother died. She died. He said nothing. The most important thing Robert Craig Cox ever said about this case is not any of his partial confessions or theatrical silences. It is what investigators discovered about his employment during the summer of 1992. That summer, he worked as a utility locator for a company in South Central Springfield. His job was to go to residential addresses throughout the city and mark utility lines before construction or renovation work began. In a letter he sent to the Springfield News leader from prison in 2006, Cox acknowledged that he had performed this work across the city, including, he wrote, in the vicinity of Cheryl Levitt's home, 1717 East Delmare Street. In the same letter, he claimed that in the years before writing it, he had not remembered working there. The contradiction between working near a specific address and not remembering working near that same address has never been satisfactorily explained. Here is what a utility locator, working legally and in uniform, can do that almost no one else can do. He can appear at a residential address with an authoritative reason to be there and leave without any neighbor or resident remembering him as a threat. He can walk the perimeter of a property, note window positions, observe whether the house has exterior lighting and where, assess which entrances are visible from the street. He can, over multiple visits across multiple months, learn patterns, who comes and goes when the house goes quiet, whether the residents are cautious about their doors. One of the theories that Springfield investigators returned to repeatedly across 3 decades is that whoever entered the Levitt home that night may have done so by ruse, by presenting at the door as someone with a legitimate reason to knock after 2 in the morning. A utility emergency, a gas leak, something urgent enough to bring 3 women who had just settled into bed back to the front door without their purses, their keys, their shoes. A utility locator would know the language, would know what a credible utility emergency sounds like, would know which utility could justify waking a household at 2:15 in the morning without raising the alarm of a neighborhood. Cox has never been charged in connection with the Springfield Three. He remains a person of interest, not a named suspect, and nothing in this analysis constitutes a claim of guilt. What the record permits is this observation: the documented fabrication of his 1992 alibi, his employment circumstances that year, his acknowledged familiarity with the vicinity of the Levitt home, his pattern of violence against women, and his unprompted insistence that he knew the 3 women were dead and buried, all represent a collection of indicators that, had they been assembled into a complete picture from the beginning rather than incrementally over years, might have directed investigative resources very differently. That they were not assembled from the beginning is the story. Drop the words right there in the comments right now if you have felt, across this investigation, what investigators have felt for 33 years. That the answer was always inside this case, always present in the record, always one more careful reading away from becoming visible. Right there, because that is precisely what this episode is about. Something coherent has existed inside this puzzle from the beginning. The failures that have kept it hidden were not failures of missing information. They were failures of how existing information was held, connected, and weighted. Let us talk about the physical evidence the investigation produced, because it is both more than most people realize and far less than any investigation would need. The shattered globe on the porch is one of the few genuinely anomalous physical details the scene generated. Cheryl Levitt was meticulous and careful. She had recently installed deadbolt locks on the doors. She cared about the appearance of her newly purchased home and would not have left broken glass on a porch where someone could step on it. The globe did not break by itself. The question of how it broke has generated multiple analytical threads across the investigation. One interpretation is that a person approaching the porch in darkness struck the fixture. Another is that the globe was deliberately broken to reduce visibility, to make activity on the porch harder for neighbors to observe from their windows in the dark. A third, more troubling interpretation is that the globe was broken during a physical movement, when someone was being carried or restrained past the fixture on their way out of the house. No definitive account of how the globe broke has ever been established, partly because the first piece of physical evidence was swept into a bin by a teenager who was trying to do the right thing. The van sightings deserve extended attention, because they represent the nearest thing this investigation has to a physical thread that has never been resolved. Two independent witnesses reported similar vehicles in the vicinity of East Delmare Street in the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. The description that appeared most consistently was an older avocado or moss green Dodge panel van from the mid-1960s to the early 1970s with a white grille. No side windows or very limited ones, rust along the lower body panels. One witness reported seeing this van, or something closely resembling it, in a driveway near Delmare Street on the morning of June 7th. She stated that a young blonde woman was seated in the driver's position and that the woman appeared frightened. She reported hearing a male voice from inside the van say, "Do not do anything stupid." She did not report the sighting for several days because she was afraid. A second witness was sitting in a grocery store parking lot near the Levitt home that same morning when he observed a similar van with a young blonde woman in the driver's seat. He believed something was wrong with the situation. He wrote down the license plate on a newspaper he was carrying. He later threw the newspaper away, convinced at the time that what he had seen was not relevant. He was subsequently hypnotized by investigators and was able to recall only the first 3 characters of the plate. 3 characters. The van was never identified. It was never located. In 2002, investigators went to a concrete company in Webster County after 2 women reported seeing men associated with a green van at that location. Cadaver dogs searched 3 sites and recovered bones that proved too old to belong to the Springfield Three. In April of 2003, tips led detectives to farmland south of Ozark, Missouri, where excavation uncovered 2 items: traces of blood and a fragment from a green-painted vehicle. The blood was submitted for laboratory analysis. The results were inconclusive. The green vehicle fragment has never been publicly connected to a specific van. There is a third name from the persons of interest file that belongs in this analysis, partly because of what he represents as a behavioral type and partly because his story illustrates the specific difficulty of working a case in which credible seeming information appears and then fails to hold under pressure. Steve Garrison was connected to both the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club and, through that connection, to Dustin Recca. In 1993, he was arrested for the brutal assault of a woman in Springfield. Facing serious charges, he offered investigators information about the Springfield Three in exchange for favorable consideration on his case. He told investigators he had heard someone confessing to the murders at a party. He stated the women's bodies had been transported to a hog farm. He provided details, and investigators said that some of what he described was non-public information that should not have been available to someone without direct or secondary knowledge of what had actually happened. Non-public information appearing in a voluntary account is what investigators call guilty knowledge. It is one of the most significant indicators an investigator can encounter because it suggests the person knows something they could only know through involvement. The legal threshold for acting on it is, of course, considerably higher than the investigative significance of encountering it. A judge, on the strength of this assessment, reduced Garrison's bail. Police moved him to a hotel while they processed his information. He walked out of the hotel immediately. Days later, he assaulted another woman in Springfield. He was subsequently convicted of rape, sodomy, burglary, and robbery. He has never been charged with anything related to the Springfield Three. The guilty knowledge he appeared to possess either was genuine and has never been acted upon in any legally productive way, or it was a calculated performance by a man who understood exactly what investigators had been theorizing publicly and deployed the appearance of knowledge as an instrument to get out of custody long enough to hurt another person. Both interpretations are coherent. The record does not resolve between them, and the inability to resolve between them is itself a data point about the condition of the investigation. This pattern, in which the investigation is handed something that looks like a key, and then discovers the lock is not where the key was supposed to fit, repeats itself so consistently across the Springfield Three case that it begins to feel less like bad luck and more like a structural feature. A feature of cases in which the absence of physical evidence creates a vacuum that other kinds of information, testimony, rumor, confession, partial disclosure rush to fill, and in filling, often obscure more than they illuminate. Genuine knowledge and performed knowledge look identical from the outside. Distinguishing between them requires physical corroboration, and in a case that has never produced physical corroboration, every piece of testimonial information is permanently uncertain, permanently available for reinterpretation, permanently unable to carry the weight that resolution requires. And then there is Larry Dwayne Hall. Hall was born in 1962 in Wabash, Indiana, an identical twin who spent his early life in circumstances that produced the kind of psychological damage that researchers in developmental criminology have spent decades mapping. His father worked at the town's Falls Cemetery, and from the age of 12, Hall helped dig graves. He was frequently bullied, struggled academically except in history and English, and his twin brother Gary would later describe him as having profound antisocial tendencies that began in childhood. The specifics of Hall's developmental profile, as documented by researchers at Radford University and others who have studied him extensively, follow the pattern that appears with notable consistency in the biographies of individuals who develop towards predatory violence, social isolation, a specific relationship to death cultivated in childhood and adolescence through proximity to burial rather than through pathological fixation, a period of escalating fantasy that begins in the relative privacy of internal experience and gradually becomes externalized through increasingly specific and actionable behavior. The cemetery work is worth examining carefully in that context. It is not, by itself, a marker of anything. Children who grow up around their parents' occupations develop relationships to those occupations that are wide-ranging and complex. But in the context of what came later, the particular intimacy with burial that Hall developed at 12 years old, in a profession that required physical labor to place the dead in the ground, belongs in any complete account of how he became what he became. Researchers at Radford University have documented Hall extensively. He is believed to be responsible for the deaths and disappearances of more than 50 women across 13 states, though convictions exist only in the 1993 kidnapping and murder of 15-year-old Jessica Roach in Illinois, for which he is currently serving a life sentence without parole at a federal facility in Butner, North Carolina. His method was opportunistic and quiet. He did not leave physical evidence in victims' homes. He moved through landscapes rather than being rooted in them, traveling extensively across the Midwest and South for Civil War reenactment events. He used the historical costume as both cover and, according to his brother Gary, as a framework for acting on violent impulses he had been accumulating for years. The reenactment circuit is worth understanding as an operational context. It provided Hall with a legitimate, documented reason to be in specific places at specific times, a cover story that was verifiable and socially unremarkable. It meant that his movements across the Midwest could be explained to anyone who asked by reference to a public event with a schedule and a roster. It also meant that his presence in a region on a specific weekend could be established by official reenactment records without necessarily accounting for everything he did during the surrounding days. Gary Hall stated later that many of his brother's alleged victims shared a specific physical type. Many of them, in Gary's recollection of what his brother told him across years of conversation, had the same face. On June 6th and 7th of 1992, a Civil War reenactment was held in Pleasant Hope, Missouri. Pleasant Hope is approximately 20 miles north of Springfield. The route from Pleasant Hope south to Springfield runs along Highway H and then Route 65, which passes through the eastern part of the city in the vicinity of East Delmare Street. Gary Hall later stated that Larry had confessed to the murder of the Springfield Three. The specific language attributed to him, when asked about his involvement in a separate case by an investigator, was the word "we," used in connection with the Springfield Three. The word "we," in the context of a man being interviewed about a specific crime he is not being asked about, and responding by applying a first-person plural pronoun to a different crime, is a linguistically specific choice. It implies either direct participation or direct knowledge of who participated. Hall has never elaborated on the usage. He has not been given the opportunity to, because he has refused to speak with Springfield officers. An anonymous account appearing in online case discussion forums described an encounter in the woods outside Springfield in the early hours of June 7th that, if accurate, would be significant. The account, from someone claiming to have been 15 years old in 1992 and camping in the area, described a van, 3 individuals, and 3 women in states of apparent distress. There is no way to assess the credibility of this account. It is unverifiable, and it cannot be incorporated into any confident analysis. What can be stated is this: Hall's documented operational methodology, his known geographic proximity to Springfield on the days surrounding the disappearances, his use of a van consistent with witness descriptions from the Delmare Street vicinity, and his pattern of self-incriminating statements to his brother and to various investigators over years, all represent a collection of indicators that the Springfield investigation has been unable to either confirm or conclusively disprove. Hall has refused to speak with Springfield officers. He has confessed to dozens of murders and recanted everyone, a pattern that investigators have used to argue that his Springfield claims should be discounted, but which also describes with precision the behavior of someone who understands exactly how far a statement can go before it becomes actionable and remains carefully on the near side of that line. That pattern of partial disclosure and strategic recantation is itself a form of information. It indicates someone who has maintained conscious awareness of their legal exposure over decades, who has calibrated their disclosures to stay within a zone of deniability, and who has derived something from the practice of speaking about the cases without ever providing the specific, corroborated detail that would transform speech into evidence. Whether what Hall derives from this practice is the psychological satisfaction of proximity to the attention the cases generate, or the more calculated benefit of remaining ambiguous rather than definitively excluded, the record does not resolve. Both are possible. Both fit the behavioral pattern. He has never been charged in connection with this case. No evidence places him definitively in Springfield on June 7, 1992. We need to go now into the specific institutional failures this investigation produced, because the record supports direct language and the analysis requires it. In 1993, the case was described by Darrell Moore, a former assistant prosecuting attorney at the Greene County Prosecutor's Office, as the most micromanaged case he had ever seen. That description, from someone with professional standing to make it, points towards something important about the specific way that management structure distorted the investigation's direction. Experienced detectives, according to Moore and others who worked within the investigation, were not permitted to exercise independent judgment. Key suspects that working-level detectives believed warranted sustained attention were ruled out at the level of the chief's office. This is a specific and important distinction. In well-functioning investigative operations, the people closest to the evidence, the detectives who have read the documents, interviewed the witnesses, driven the routes, and sat across a table from the persons of interest, carry a form of knowledge that is qualitatively different from the knowledge available to the people managing the investigation from above. That close-range knowledge is often the source of the investigative insight that resolves cases. The detective who has listened to 50 hours of interview tape knows something about a subject's voice patterns and stress responses that cannot be transmitted in a summary report to a superior. When management overrides the tactical judgments of the detectives closest to the evidence, it risks discarding exactly the knowledge that is most likely to move the case forward. Police Chief Terry Knowles had come to Springfield from the FBI and brought with him the credibility and authority of that background. But the atmosphere his management style created inside the investigation, as described by people who operated within it, was one in which the external pressure of public attention and media scrutiny had been allowed to influence tactical decisions in ways that compromised the investigation's structural integrity. Cases that receive intense public attention are not harder to solve in any evidential sense. They are harder to solve in an institutional sense because the mechanisms that activate cognitive bias, the pressure to perform, the risk of appearing uncertain or inconsistent, the political cost of reversing prior positions, operate more powerfully when the audience watching is larger and closer. This is confirmation bias operating at an institutional level, and it works differently there than it does in an individual. When the person with final authority over investigative direction has publicly committed to specific theoretical frameworks, and when that person is operating under daily media pressure to show progress, the conditions are in place for the investigation to become oriented around confirming the frameworks that have already been articulated, rather than honestly evaluating competing possibilities. The individual detectives within that system may understand clearly that a line of inquiry deserves more attention. But if the institutional culture does not support challenging the established direction, the question does not get asked, and the lead does not get followed. The van is the most direct illustration of this dynamic in the Springfield Three case. Two independent witnesses independently described a distinctive and unusual vehicle in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene at the relevant time. One of them reported a frightened blonde woman in the driver's seat and a threatening male voice from inside. These witnesses did not know each other. Their descriptions were consistent with each other. The physical type of vehicle they described was unusual enough that it constituted a genuinely tractable lead. A mid-1960s to early 1970s avocado green Dodge panel van, no side windows, rust on the lower body, white grille. Dodge panel van registration records in Missouri and surrounding states in 1992 were a finite, innumerable list. That list, matched against criminal records and geographic profiles of individuals with documented histories of violence against women, represents an investigative action that appears never to have been executed in the systematic way it deserved. The witness who wrote down the license plate threw the paper away. The witness who heard the threatening voice waited days to come forward. These are individual human failures, and they are understandable. But the investigative response to those failures, specifically the failure to aggressively reconstruct what could still be reconstructed, produced consequences that cannot now be undone. What does it mean to aggressively reconstruct? It means canvassing every body shop, every mechanic, every car dealership, every salvage yard in the region that handled older Dodge commercial vehicles in the summer of 1992. It means checking state registration renewal records for vehicles of that type and age in a 200-mile radius. It means cross-referencing those registrations against every name in the persons of interest file and every name that appears in the tip logs. It means showing photographic references to every resident of the streets nearest to 1717 East Del Mar and asking whether they had ever seen a vehicle matching that description in their neighborhood, even weeks or months before the disappearances. This is not glamorous investigative work. It is systematic, time-intensive, and expensive, and the record does not suggest it was done with the completeness it deserved. There is another dimension to this investigative failure that belongs explicitly in the record. The case of Cox demonstrates the specific cost of ruling out suspects too quickly and too absolutely. When Cox was interviewed in 1992 and his girlfriend provided the church alibi, the investigation moved away from him. The movement was based on corroborated testimony. But corroborated testimony, as any experienced investigator understands, is only as reliable as the person providing the corroboration. When that corroboration subsequently proved to have been manufactured at the suspect's instruction, the investigation had already invested 5 years in a posture that did not treat him as a live subject. 5 years. During those 5 years, Cox remained in Missouri and then in Texas, where he continued a documented pattern of targeting women. The records of his movements during that period, his employment history, his associations, and his communications were not being assembled the way they would have been assembled if the investigation had maintained a live posture toward him. By the time his girlfriend recanted before the grand jury, the trail was 5 years colder than it needed to be. The cold trail problem is compounded by a specific feature of alibi-based ruling out. When an alibi is accepted and an investigative line is formally closed, the records associated with that line tend to be filed in a way that reflects their closed status. Future detectives picking up the case inherit not just the files, but the interpretive framework embedded in how those files are organized and annotated. A file marked ruled out by alibi tells the detective reviewing it to move on, because the work was done. What it does not tell them is that the alibi was solicited, that the girlfriend was asked rather than volunteering, that the corroboration was therefore inherently suspect from the moment it was offered. That context may be in the case file somewhere, buried in interview notes or investigative memos, but the summary level designation ruled out does not carry it. And in a case with 27,000 pages, detectives reviewing cold case files are often working from summaries. In 1992, DNA analysis was not available in Missouri for criminal investigation. It would not become available in the state until 1995. 3 years after 3 women were abducted from a house that had been processed by a detective who could still smell fresh varnish. This is not an argument about negligence alone. It is an argument about the intersection of chronology and technology. The Springfield Three disappeared at a moment when the forensic tools that would have been most useful either did not exist in the relevant jurisdiction or arrived too late to work with a scene that had already been compromised. The physical space that those tools would have operated on had been walked through by 18 people before any investigative authority arrived. By the time modern DNA analysis became available in Missouri in 1995, 3 years had passed. By the time it became powerful enough to work with degraded and partial samples, more than a decade had passed. The window between what the scene once contained and what any future analysis could recover had been narrowing steadily from the moment Janelle and Mike walked through the front door. The result is a case built almost entirely on testimonial evidence, behavioral analysis, and pattern recognition. And pattern recognition, without physical anchoring, is exactly the kind of evidence that is endlessly debatable, endlessly open to reinterpretation, and almost impossible to bring to the legal threshold required for prosecution. By 1997, 5 years after the disappearances, Cheryl Levitt and Susie were legally declared dead. Stacy McCall's family did not file for a declaration of death. They have stated they will not do so until her remains are found. This position, maintained across more than 30 years, is not a legal technicality. It is a statement about what it means to live inside the absence that this case created. Stacy's mother Janice and her father Stu built the One Missing Link organization to support other families of missing persons, because they had navigated that experience without adequate institutional support and understood from the inside how catastrophically alone those families can feel. They converted their grief into institutional action because the institution that should have provided resolution had not done so. A bench was installed in Phelps Grove Park in Springfield in June of 1997, dedicated to all 3 women. The investigation was formally moved to cold case status. Across the investigation's history, more than 5,200 tips have been logged. More than 27,000 pages of documentation exist in the case files. Detectives have followed leads into 21 states. They have searched caves, farms, abandoned buildings, hospital car parks, lake beds, and stretches of river. In 2006, a private individual named Baird contacted a ground-penetrating radar expert named Rick Norland, who had assisted New York City authorities following the atrocities of September of 2001. Norland conducted a scan beneath the surface of the parking garage at Cox South Hospital in Springfield, following an informant's tip that the women might be buried in its foundations. Norland reported that the scan found 3 anomalies consistent with grave sites approximately 3 feet below the surface of the concrete. He recommended that a core sample be obtained by drilling to allow a camera or sensor to determine definitively what the anomalies were. Baird and Norland shared their findings with the Springfield Police Department. A spokesperson for the department responded that the verification process would cost thousands of dollars and was not considered worth pursuing. Their own expert, they said, had concluded that Norland's findings were not credible. Baird then offered to cover the cost of the core sample personally. The department declined again. Experts in the field of ground-penetrating radar have publicly stated their disagreement with the department's dismissal of Norland's findings. The anomalies have never been physically investigated. This decision, and the reasoning used to justify it, represents something important in the psychology of institutional response to a case that has gone cold. Cold case status does not mean investigative obligation has ended. It means the active resources applied to the case have been reduced. But reduction of resources carries a specific cognitive risk. The threshold for action rises alongside the reduction in active engagement, until the threshold becomes so high that even concrete physical anomalies consistent with burial sites beneath a location identified by an informant are deemed insufficient to justify the cost of a drill. The informant's tip was assessed as not credible on the grounds that the parking garage was constructed more than a year after the disappearances. But construction timelines that begin after a disappearance do not preclude burial during construction. They may, in certain circumstances, create it. The 3 anomalies are still there. As of this writing, they have never been physically examined. Let us turn now to what the current state of investigative technology means for a case like this one. The Springfield Three disappeared in 1992. The forensic tools available in 1992 were inadequate to the scene as it existed. But the landscape of forensic investigation has changed almost beyond recognition in the decades since. DNA technology that did not exist in Missouri in 1992 is now not only available but powerful enough to produce usable profiles from partial, degraded, and contaminated samples that would have been worthless a decade ago. Genealogical DNA matching, which has resolved cases that had been cold for 30 and 40 years by connecting partial profiles to living relatives through publicly available genetic databases, has become a legitimate and productive investigative tool used by law enforcement agencies across the country. If any biological material from the Levitt home was ever collected and preserved, the analytical possibilities today are qualitatively different from what they were in 1992 or 1995. This is not a theoretical proposition. Genealogical DNA analysis has resolved cases in which the original physical evidence was so degraded that first-generation DNA analysis returned nothing. Second- and third-generation analytical techniques have produced profiles from that same material. The question of whether preserved material from the Levitt home exists and whether those techniques have been applied to it is one that the public record does not fully answer. Digital record systems that were incomplete or non-existent in 1992 now hold archived data on vehicle registrations, employment records, and geographic movement patterns that can be queried in ways that were simply not available to investigators working in the early 1990s. The registration databases for Dodge panel vans of the specific type described by 2 independent witnesses in 1992 represent a finite, innumerable list of vehicles registered in Missouri and surrounding states during that period. That list, matched against criminal records of individuals with documented histories of violence against women and cross-referenced against geographic profiles, constitutes an investigative action that current analytical tools could perform with a thoroughness that 1992 methodology could not approach. The vehicles on that list are a finite number. The owners are a finite number. The intersection of those owners with the criminal records database of the relevant era is a smaller number still. It is not a large number, it is a tractable list. Behavioral analysis methodologies have also evolved substantially. The research literature on serial predators operating across regional boundaries, on the psychological profiles associated with ruse-based residential entry, and on the specific patterns of self-incrimination and strategic recantation that characterize individuals who understand their legal exposure, has deepened considerably since the early 1990s. This is not an argument that the original investigators could have done more with what they had. In many respects, the record suggests they worked extremely hard with the tools and methodologies available to them. It is an argument that the case as it exists today, with the documentation it contains and the evidentiary possibilities that current technology has opened, deserves to be treated not as a historical cold case, but as an active investigative problem to which modern resources have not yet been comprehensively applied. The van has a specific description, a specific color, a specific body style, a specific estimated production era. The two witnesses who described it were independent of each other. Their accounts were consistent. That description has not been matched to a specific vehicle in 33 years of investigation. The reason it has not been matched is not that the information does not exist. The reason is that the systematic cross-referencing of that description against all available records, using all available analytical tools, has not been performed to completion. There are people alive today who know things about this case. This is not speculation. It is, in the statistical context of a crime of this complexity, close to certainty. Cases involving the abduction of 3 people from a residential home in a populated city require logistics that leave traces in human memory. Someone drove the van, if there was a van. Someone knew where the women were taken. Someone heard something said in a moment when the weight of it was not yet clear to them. Someone has been carrying a piece of information for 33 years in a private compartment of their understanding, perhaps not even recognizing it as information about this case. Perhaps having told themselves that what they know is not connected to this, is not significant, is not the kind of thing that would matter now. It would matter. Whatever it is, however small, it would matter. The Springfield Police Department tip line remains active. The number is 417-864-1810. The Crime Stoppers line is 417-869-8477. The reward fund stands at $43,000. Janelle Kirby, who heard Susie say, "Follow me to my house, okay," and watched her drive away into the dark of a June morning, has carried that moment through her entire adult life. Janice and Stu McCall, who built an organization out of their loss because the alternative was less bearable, are still waiting for a resolution that the investigation has never provided. These are not abstractions. They are specific people living with specific absences that have lasted 33 years because the sequence of failures described in this episode has not yet been interrupted. In 2006, Robert Craig Cox wrote a letter from prison to the Springfield News Leader. In it, he claimed he had worked near Cheryl Levitt's home that summer. The letter was published. It generated discussion. The investigation noted it. And then the institutional weight of a case that had been cold for more than a decade exerted its gravity. And the letter was filed among the 27,000 pages, and the conversation moved on. A man in prison, with a documented history of abduction and violence against women, whose alibi for the night in question was subsequently revealed to have been fabricated at his instruction, writing to a newspaper to say he had worked near the house where 3 women vanished on the night his alibi broke down, is a specific and unusual thing. It is not evidence in the legal sense. It is a statement that, in the context of everything else the record contains about this individual, represents a pattern of behavior that investigators have described as consistent with someone who is managing information rather than freely sharing it. The behavior of managing information about a case rather than being fully forthcoming, combined with the behavior of manufacturing a false alibi, combined with the behavior of announcing knowledge of the victim's fate, combined with the documented operational capability to approach the house without raising alarm, combined with the proximity of his employment area to the Levitt home, combined with the pattern of violence against women that brackets the relevant period on both sides, constitutes a collection of indicators that, as an analytical matter, has never been definitively closed. He has never been charged. The investigation has never been able to produce the physical evidence required to bridge the gap between analytical indicators and legal sufficiency. That gap is 33 years wide. What this case reveals, at its deepest level, is not something unique to Springfield or to the 1990s or to any specific police department under any specific chief. It reveals something about the structure of cases that are built entirely on the absence of resolution. When a case has no body, no weapon, no physical anchor, it becomes a permanent hypothesis, always open, never falsified. Investigators cycle back through the same names because the names that are already in the file are easier to access than names that are not. Witnesses are contacted again when new leads arrive, and they report again what they have already reported. Because memory is not a recording and 33 years of recall do not improve with time. The families live inside an absence that has no defined edge, no moment where the grief can settle into something that is past rather than present. The case produces a specific kind of institutional exhaustion. After enough cycles of investment and non-resolution, after enough tips that lead to excavations that produce nothing, after enough public attention that generates no actionable intelligence, the threshold for action rises, and the energy available to clear that threshold falls. This is not indifference. It is a human response to a kind of institutional frustration that compounds over time into something that can look, from the outside, indistinguishable from giving up. The Springfield Police Department said in June of 2025, when the case marked its 33rd year, that no promising leads had emerged and that tip volume had decreased. They asked the public to come forward. 27,000 pages. Leads in 21 states, 5,200 tips. 3 anomalies under a parking garage that were never physically investigated. A fabricated alibi that took 5 years to unravel. A letter from prison acknowledging proximity to the house. A distinctive van that 2 independent witnesses saw and that has never been identified. All of it is still open. None of it has been resolved. The evening of June 6, 1992, ended with something small and ordinary that has stayed with everyone who has spent time inside this case. Kathy Kirby was awake when the 2 young women left her house in Battlefield just after 2 in the morning. She watched them walk to their separate cars. She heard Susie say the words, heard Stacy answer. She watched their tail lights move away from the curb and disappear into the Springfield night, heading northeast toward East Delmare Street. Susie was going home to show her friend the waterbed, to check in with her mother because she always checked in with her mother, to end the long, bright, celebratory day in the specific comfort of her own space with someone she was happy to share it with. Stacy was going to fold her clothes neatly before she slept, because she was tidy in the particular way that people are tidy when the world still makes sense. Cheryl was already in bed, her book face down on the nightstand, her glasses beside it, not knowing that the daughter who always checked in was coming home, not knowing that the coming home would become the last thing that happened in the house before everything stopped. 3 women, a graduation cake in the refrigerator, a dog that would be found frantic and alone in a sealed house in the morning, $900 in a purse on the floor, cigarettes that were never lit, a waterbed that was never slept in, and somewhere in the 27,000 pages of documented effort, an answer that has not yet been arrived at. The cases examined on this channel exist at the intersection of what happened and what was missed. In the Springfield Three, what was missed was not a single thing. It was a sequence, a porch globe swept away before investigators arrived, a message erased from a tape, an alibi accepted that was not true, a lead not followed to its end, a van not identified, an anomaly not drilled, a letter from prison filed among the other papers. Each of those misses was ordinary. Each made sense in the moment it occurred. And collectively, they have preserved a 33-year silence that someone, somewhere, has been maintaining through effort that must have a cost. That cost accumulates. Silences of this duration do not rest easy on the people carrying them. They are sustained through continuous effort, and continuous effort against a weight that does not diminish is a particular kind of burden. The answer exists inside this case. The question that would unlock it has not yet been asked in the right way, at the right time, by the right person with access to the right combination of information. That is how cases like this break. Not with a dramatic single revelation, with a detail that connects to another detail, and then to another, until a shape emerges that was always present in the record, waiting to be assembled. Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streer, Stacy McCall. They were not cases. They were not designations. They were a hairdresser with 250 clients who had just bought her first home and was painting window borders on the evening she disappeared. They were a 19-year-old who went to her mother's room every night to say she was home safe. They were an 18-year-old who folded her flowered shorts before she went to sleep in a house where she felt safe and was gone before she woke. They deserved the answer. The people who loved them deserve the answer. And the answer is inside a silence that 33 years of effort has not yet broken, but has been narrowing toward a point where breaking it becomes inevitable. The Springfield Police Department tip line is 417-864-1810. The Crime Stoppers line is 417-869-8477. The reward is $43,000. If you have anything, the investigation wants to hear from you. Every piece of information that seems too small to matter is the piece of information that has not yet been connected to the piece that would make it matter. That is how these cases end. Not with the dramatic gesture, but with the quiet detail, finally placed in the right context, finally seen in relation to the right other detail, finally making the shape that has always been there visible. If this investigation reached you the way the best investigations do, as something you cannot quite put down when it is over, there are more cases on this channel built around the same principle, that what was missed matters as much as what was found. That understanding the mechanisms of how things go unseen is how we begin to see them. Like this video and subscribe so that these cases stay in front of you. Every watch, every comment, every share keeps these names alive in public memory, and keeping these names alive in public memory is the only contribution most of us can make toward the moment when, finally, the silence breaks.